So what has been happening in the UK recently has been inevitable for at least the last 9 years, but pretty much for the last, you could go back to the policies of Margaret Thatcher, or you could go to the absolute hysteria in the wake of 9/11, the total dehumanization of Western Muslims, whether they be born in the UK and the West, whether they be refugees, it doesn't really matter. People have been fear-mongering for a long, long time about the supposed barbarian hordes coming to the West to destroy so enlightened, tolerant, secular Western values. And part of the reason I turned against like new atheist thinkers like Dawkins, Harris when I was like 20 or whatever is because I realized they were straight up racists. And I've made multiple videos on this channel where I talk about the rise of Western chauvinism. It's no longer about just straight up white supremacy, although that's a part of it. It's more about this, creation of the West, these Western values, where all of us Westerners across a variety of cultures and maybe even ethnic groups, we all agree on a certain degree of tolerant values. But not those Muslims, those scary, scary Muslims, they don't agree with us, and they're actually coming over here to take over the UK, introduce Sharia law, and treat all of our citizens in the UK terribly. And this has been commonplace in UK politics for a long, long time. But we recently had an election which was pretty much just fought on things like immigration and who could be the biggest fascist. Like, part of Keir Starmer's campaign was legit about deporting people faster. Like, the whole Overton window in this country has shifted so far right. Our groups in the Labour Party have been just as bad on this than others. And the reason I'm singling out the Labour Party is we expect this of conservative groups, but the Labour Party have also ran cover for Israel's genocide. Now, if you're going to create the conditions in a country where it's uncontroversial, for the most part, for the political class and the journalism class to support a genocide, you have to completely dehumanize a group of people. Now, that is, of course, the Palestinian people who've been facing this genocide, but, of course, what has made this go down so well in the West is the fact that most Palestinians are Muslims. And when you have a group like Hamas, well, to most Westerners, Hamas, Taliban, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, what's the difference? They're all scary Muslim barbarians, and if there's any pro-Palestinian groups out there, then they must support Hamas as well. And essentially, in Western countries, being pro-Palestine was basically described as being an anti-Semite. Supporting the mere existence of the Palestinian people, to many people in the elite in this country who whipped up this hysteria about pro-Palestinian supporters, that is basically you being a massive racist, even a Nazi. And it's not surprising that from Keith Starmer to Tommy Robinson, these people who bang on about deportation and British values and shit like that, they also support Israel as well. And they've created the conditions in this country for the genocide of a group of Muslims in the Middle East to become very palatable, but also seen as a good thing. And in that climate, is it any wonder that you're getting far-right riots, lynch mobs against Muslim groups in the UK? And the response of the political class, the response of the press, has basically been to run more cover for this because they've been promoting this hysteria for years and years and years and playing into it. The Labour Party is institutionally racist, so is the Tory party. It's been called out by Muslims in both parties. And of course, we know the xenophobia has been rising. The Brexit referendum was primarily on the issue of Turkey potentially joining the EU. I'm not joking. People might have memory hold that. I haven't. And it was literally on the radio about 100 million Muslims joining the EU and they could just come to the UK. Like, that was part of the reason people voted for Brexit. And of course, in the background, what exacerbates all of this, beyond the culture war stuff, is the economic conditions of the UK that has been suffering 14 years of austerity policies and basically just becoming a shit place to live, wages stagnating while public services being cut everywhere that isn't London. And even London, as someone who was born here and lives here, even that has been going downhill as well, despite the wealth being concentrated in this city, because the wealth is concentrated in this country in the hands of a few, the same hands that are actually stoking a culture war. So you don't realise your enemies aren't poor refugees who happen to be Muslims from a different country. It's actually British people who have ties to the aristocracy going back nearly 1,000 years, who loot this country consistently and use their outlets in the press to stir up hatred against the most marginalised, so you don't realise who's actually destroying the country. So I've been speaking for a while, but that's to just paint the context of what has led up to this recent surge in violence. And of course, it comes after this terrible murder of children in the UK, which a far-right claim was done by a Muslim asylum seeker, which was quickly debunked, but it doesn't fucking matter, does it? So we're going to get into that in just one sec. I just want to give a little shout out to Refugee Action, which is a refugee charity you guys can donate to. I put the link in my description. And just some context, Refugee Action help people who've survived some of the world's worst regimes and get them basic support that they need to live with dignity, and then help them build safe, happy and productive lives in the UK. The vision of Refugee Action is that refugees and people seeking asylum will be welcome in the UK, they will get justice, live free of poverty and be able to successfully rebuild their lives. So anyone clicking on this video would have seen the videos of all the riots taking place, but I actually think a lot of people, if you're not English, but I also think a lot of people not from the UK don't even know how this started. They just think it's, you know, these massive riots that just appeared out of nowhere, which you could link it to the Israel stuff and the election, but this is what, you know, sparked it all. So Southport stabbing, Al Jazeera reporting, what led to the spread of disinformation. So angry protesters took to the streets in the British seaside town of Southport and at the official residence of the Prime Minister after a stabbing attack killed 3 girls this week. In Southport on Tuesday, protesters hurled bricks at police and at a local mosque, injuring more than 50 police officers. In London, similar protests had chants of "Save our kids and we want our country back." At the core of the protests was the belief that the suspect who killed these children, identified as Axel Rudak Kubana, 17, and born to Rwandan parents in Cardiff, was a Muslim immigrant, which he wasn't. He was charged on Thursday with 3 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, and 1 possession of a blade. He killed 3 girls aged 6, 7, and 9 at an attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga session for children in Southport, and 8 children and 2 adults were also injured. Little information was released about the suspect initially, other than that he was 17, because laws in the UK make it a criminal offence to identify a suspect who is a minor until legal proceedings begin. In the absence of information from media organisations and local Merseyside police, unfounded speculation resulted in a slew of Islamophobic and anti-migrant posts on social media. False claims about the suspect's origins spread like wildfire, with some falsely naming him as Ali al-Shakati with no official source. There was also claims that the suspect had arrived in the UK on a small boat in 2023, which was also false. By July 30th, a day after the incident, there was 27 million impressions on social media for posts stating or speculating that the attacker was a Muslim, a migrant, a refugee, or a foreigner. Andrew Tate also said in a video on Twitter that an undocumented migrant had arrived on a boat and had attacked the girls in Southport. And basically all this shit was just boosted by social media. And of course, Tommy Robinson and the British far right were allowed back on social media by Elon Musk. And because they all buy the verification system, all their posts get boosted. You can see a post here. Wall Street Silver, the UK police are compromised, and some racist post about apparently British police loving Muslims, but calling all white Britons who are protesting Nazis and putting them in jail, with Elon Musk boosting this himself. So yeah, basically what happened, in the absence of evidence, people just started saying it was an asylum seeker from a Muslim country who wasn't born in the UK who stabbed these girls because he hates British women. Now, Elon Musk's Twitter is an absolute cesspool. I've been covering his descent into being a Nazi for a long, long time. But yeah, the American far-right picked up on this and boosted all these accounts and boosted all these posts. And Elon Musk is directly responsible for these far-right riots, which he has been encouraging on his platform for a long, long time. Like, Elon Musk is a Nazi, that's not controversial to say. And Twitter is basically a social media primarily for Nazi misinformation. And there's a reason they don't even care about posting this on their literal accounts with their faces on it. I saw them organising the riots on Twitter. Just like straight up people, random people with blue ticks who are real people posting all this information on Twitter. This is the same site where cisgender is a slur, by the way. Obviously, other social media sites like TikTok were also responsible because that is also a cesspool of misinformation. You have like private Facebook groups, Telegram channels, which help organize all this far-right violence. One thing I want to get into as well, a lot of this is linked to football culture. At the initial protests against mosques, because they thought a Muslim had stabbed someone, which the premise is ridiculous anyway, there were like loads of middle-aged men drinking cans of beer, like bringing six-packs with them, because the far-right just want to fight. That's it. They don't give a shit. They just want to target Muslims and beat the shit out of them. And they're bringing cans, and they're all off their faces on cocaine as well, because these people are primarily football hooligans. It's similar to the Greek far right. It's similar to a lot of European far right. There is a massive crossover with football, booze culture, and these far right protesters. Not to say everyone who participates in that football culture are like this, but you can clearly see, even through the charts, these people are middle-aged dudes primarily, white middle-aged dudes who just want to fuck shit up because that's what they want to do when they're drinking too much. And you actually saw these types with that Attack on Wembley documentary as well, when they were just trashing London, despite the fact that England were in the Euro final. They were celebrating an achievement of the England national team by acting in a similar way. Of course, what's happening now is far worse, far more violent, but you can see the carry-on from that type of shit anyway. But yeah, I was talking about the election, and the total normalization and dehumanization of Muslims in Britain is common across the political spectrum. Pretty much only, I guess, the Green Party and maybe the Lib Dems don't completely get taken over by this, but the Labour Party do. And actually, a Labour MP actually named one of the hotels in a speech last week that was then attacked by the far right. Another Labour MP was talking about how concerned they were about the attacks on the police and the damage done, only to have written a column in The Sun that said British Pakistanis are raping white girls and we must face up to it. And you saw the rhetoric being used about small boats, and that is the culture war that was stoked for the election. Like, the Tory party put out a video that if Keith Starmer got elected, they would be welcoming these refugee boats and the country would essentially be destroyed by it. And yeah, we just completely dehumanized refugees, Muslims in this country, and that was basically used as a political football in the election. Thankfully rejected by some. We saw the largest number of independent MPs ever elected, especially pro-Palestinian ones. At the same time, we also saw Nigel Farage and the electoral far right make major gains in the election for basically the first time in forever. But also the Tory party went completely far right for the second half of them running the country. So it's not surprising. And like I said, tie it all back to the Israel stuff. Tie it all back to the elite in this country stoking up Islamophobia about pro-Palestinian protesters, and the way they characterize pro-Palestinian protesters protesting their MPs was using language that basically describes the far-right riots right now. And that shows you the double standard in the country as well. Like, if you look at our far-right media, all this stuff about migrant boats, asylum seekers, it's been going on since at least 2015, and then you still have the carryover of the war on terror as well. So people in primarily England, but across the UK, a lot of them just don't see Muslims as citizens of this country, and they see them as a hostile threat just waiting to take over, so you have to defend the country from them. And like I said, it's the elite waging culture wars, so people don't realise they're waging a class war as well. Because you are so much closer to being a refugee than you are being to the elite, which people never ever remember. And the people who are destroying the country aren't Muslim refugees. It's the landed aristocracy. It's bankers. It's the people who've been destroying this country since it was even created, but definitely since Margaret Thatcher. All these people decimating public services, Tory austerity, decimating the welfare state which we built after the Second World War, and then using the excuse of, oh, it's the immigrants taking your jobs. Very old school, but it seems to be working. And now we had the Islamophobia of, yeah, they're all like pedo Muslims who want to kill your children and these savages. Because the elite in this country have just created this toxic atmosphere which they won't apologize for. They won't even say Islamophobia. They won't ever apologize for whipping up this racism against Muslims. And that's another thing I want to talk about. You can be racist against Muslims because it's a racial stereotype of a Muslim. Because when you say Muslim to people, they think of brown person. They don't really care where they're from. There are always attacks on non-Muslims from South Asia, non-Muslims from different parts of the world, because it's not about even Islam. Their protest is just about racial stereotypes and racist caricatures of people from the Middle East and North Africa and South Asia, right? These people don't care about religion, despite what Tommy Robinson obviously has been grifting on throughout his entire reformed arc after he left the EDL. He doesn't fucking care. It's really hard to get through to people. And now they're blaming Keir Starmer as if he's not racist himself against Muslims, and that he didn't just get in power from being racist and supporting a genocide while dehumanizing Muslims worldwide, right? This guy is our new prime minister. He's not a friend to Muslim communities. The Muslim vote for the Labour Party dropped massively during the last election because they hated him for what he was doing and this rhetoric he was whipping up about the small boat crisis, about Palestine and everything. But there's no consequences for saying this shit in UK politics. Say something bad about Israel and you'll be called a racist Nazi. Say something terrible about every single Muslim in the world and that's just fine. Maybe you'll even get a column in The Sun and host a show on GB News. And in the context of the UK, our education is so bad, critical thinking is so bad. People don't realise this anti-migrant shit has been going on for like centuries, right? Like all my grandparents are Irish immigrants. I know for a fact, especially my more working class ones, they faced a lot of discrimination and shit from English people who would always say crap to them about either the IRA or say crap to them about being violent, say loads of stuff about them being alcoholics and stuff like that. And at the same time, you had the Windrush generation from the Caribbean who faced so much racism and so much blame. And you had the South Asian migration as well to the UK in this period as well. And these people have always faced like so much discrimination and hatred. And it's always been just for the elite to redirect your anger against people who often have nothing, by the way, because lots of people who come from Muslim majority countries, they're fleeing war and they're fleeing discrimination and they're already coming from an impoverished place like Afghanistan, for example, right? And just imagine you yourself having to flee any country, flee your home country. Don't know what country you're from watching this, but flee it. And imagine starting in a new country where you know lots of people there like hate you just for your skin color or your religion and stuff, and how hard that is. But also you have no money, right? Think of you in that situation. Are you gonna like topple the government? Even if you find like a community just like you, you're all going to topple the government together. You're all going to completely change the laws based on your religion. To believe this, you have to believe Muslims are some sort of hive mind where all they think about is religious takeover and Sharia law. Or you could understand that just like you, even if you're a religious person watching this, they don't think about religion 24/7. They don't think about Sharia law 24/7. Most people are just trying to survive life and think of these things in terms of class and not in terms of made up cultural war shit about religion, which you shouldn't really have time for because it's a distraction to make you turn against your fellow members of your class. And it's done at the behest of the rich and powerful in this country while they loot the country. Doesn't matter if it's Labour, doesn't matter if it's the Tories, they're basically the same. And they want to divide us against each other so it's easier to rule over us. And something I actually predicted is Keith, our lovely Prime Minister, he's going to enact lots of surveillance legislation. He's going to make this country more authoritarian because he's a cop. And then what's going to happen is the Tories and the far right are going to campaign on some freedom shit. But Keith is going to do this. His plan to stop the far right surge isn't to, radically reorganize society, massive public spending, massive cuts to military spending to fund this, massive wealth taxes. He's not doing that. He's not doing that because he doesn't fundamentally care about the causes. He thinks the solution is just put more cops on the street, which we all know isn't a good solution to the far right because, in my opinion, most cops are sympathetic to the far right anyway because you have to be okay with enacting a racist legal system and carrying out deportations of vulnerable asylum seekers and brutalising marginalised communities to be a cop in the first place. And also we're seeing the complete failure of policing anyway because these police aren't up for a fight when someone actually wants a fight, like the far right often do, but they're happy to brutalise and arrest peaceful protesters if they're left-wing, our broken criminal justice system, where I just saw one of the rioters, the first ones to be arrested and charged, has got 2 months in prison, where some of the Just Stop Oil protesters who did peaceful civil disobedience got 5 years in prison, because who's more of a threat to capital in this country? People protesting things like fossil fuels, where the people in charge of extracting this and the people in charge of bringing this to the UK are part of the elite. Just Stop Oil are more of a threat to the establishment and the powerful. Therefore, they get a longer sentence. People on the far right aren't a threat because when the far right take over, which I think they will in the UK, They're going to cozy up with the same business people. This happened in Nazi Germany. The same business people who were in bed with previous governments jumped in bed with the Nazis because capitalism is totally okay with fascism and often prefers it because it's easier to do business in a fascist government because you don't even have to pay lip service to obeying things like labour law and morals. So I feel like that's what's going to happen in the UK. Keith is going to get this all wrong. He's going to respond with more authoritarianism, which will give a path to the far right, campaign about like freedom and all this other shit. And I feel like, you know, the Tories or reform will be in the next government. So that's the pressing thing. But if you're going to take away two things from this video, it's that I don't care what your political ideology is socially or whatever, because I know some conservatives might be watching this. Just realize anyone trying to do this, like make you attack other people in the UK based on things like identity or religion, they're doing it for their own ends. Tommy Robinson is funded by rich people. Tommy Robinson supports Israel. Loads of people like him are basically the elite anyway. Turning your anger against working class, refugee and migrant communities, or just anyone in the UK who isn't a white Christian, is totally misdirected anger. The people who've destroyed this country are the elite. And yeah, most of them are white English Christians who've ruined this country as well. Not poor refugees from Afghanistan who often have their countries ruined by us in the first place. And also it's important to recognise the total normalisation of fascism in British society. Like people always think when we talk about fascism, talking about like Nazi Germany, like authoritarianism, very centralised. But you have to realise places like America basically went full fascist after 9/11. You don't have to have like an authoritarian dictatorship for basically the Overton window to shift in nearly a complete fascist direction when it comes to certain issues. And the demonization and targeting of Muslims in the UK is perfectly acceptable in the mainstream discourse, from mainstream politicians, from the media, because they've decided now that is the scapegoat. They're all happy to dogpile this group to distract you from what's really going on in this country, and that's massive wealth extraction from the poorest people to enrich the people looting this country who have been doing it for decades and decades and decades, especially since we went full neoliberal. So that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.